Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smagato, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. Welcome to Words to Write By.
Hello.
Quick shout out to those who've listening to this podcast. You've probably heard this a million times, but we got to say it. Process group.
Process group.
Process group. We have a process group. You can find us on Meetup. You can find us on our website, wordstowritebypodcast.com. We hang out. We talk about writing. We don't read our writing, but we talk about writing. We talk about AI and how do we use it. We talk about our, editing techniques. We talk about our wins and we talk about our failures. And it's fun.
It is. It's a good time, and I've been getting a lot out of going to these things because it's not just Renee and I giving advice, although we obviously can, but we have a lot of really intelligent people, a lot of intelligent writers with different experiences and different takes on things.
Yep. So hope to see you there.
And with that, we're going back to the AI episodes.
Yay! They've actually become quite popular.
Well, they're interesting. I don't know if anyone else is really doing what we're doing right now.
I'm sure they're talking about it, but I don't think they're putting themselves on the chopping block like we are.
Yes. If you listen to a previous episode, Renee showed how she's using AI to analyze her memoirs pieces, how she's using it to give her feedback and tell her what direction to take.
It's like a workshop member. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because Kim, however, uses it in a different way. And I'm really impressed with this, actually. So this is going to be a great episode.
In a way, Renee and I are diametric opposites as far as writers go. Her training as a poet means that she has wonderful words. The sentences just have all these, they just have wonderful rhythm and they have great metaphors and all that stuff.
Whereas Kim, her plots are fantastic. The pacing is perfect. Her ideas are so fun. I mean, she's got really great characters. She's hilarious. It's great.
And much like without AI, Renee has gone over her stuff and figured out how to get the plot right, how to get the scenes and all that with a lot of work. I, for my first novel, just went back over the text multiple times. I just kept improving the word quality because that's a thing I'm not as good at. My background is in sciences and then journalism. And both those things, while they do teach you to write, they teach you to write in a different way. At one point, I realized that the difference between science writers and more literary writers is that when a science writer uses a metaphor, it has to make sense. It is a critical, you must understand this weird system, so I'm going to use this metaphor to what it means. If it's a bit confusing or if it kind of leads them the wrong way, it screws everything up. Whereas when you're using it in a literary way, it can match mostly, but it's also there just to give a feel.
Sure. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it before, but maybe, yeah.
So I feel like I'm very precise in my writing, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the same quality of writing in fiction. When you're writing science, communication stuff, you're aware that at any point, if it gets too complicated or too hard, your reader's going to put the book down.
Yeah.
And it's every single line has to keep giving them value. Otherwise, they're going to drop it. Whereas when you're reading a novel, sometimes you just enjoy the prose. And you don't mind that it goes on a ways.
The big thing is you don't want to break that dream from very early episodes. The reader goes into this kind of dream state where they're seeing the pictures in their mind and they're reading and they're seeing that movie. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to break the movie.
Right. Whereas if you're reading nonfiction, not creative nonfiction, but just regular nonfiction, you're usually getting information and you're assembling information in a much more literal way.
Yeah. So
anyway, I ended up doing a lot of rewrites on my first novel.
Sentence stuff.
And it got better every time. part of the reason I'm a better writer now is because when I sold the book, I had editors, they gave me feedback. I went through and I really changed things significantly. So now I'm doing book 2, and I don't want to rewrite everything 5 times over. So I decided to use AI to help me construct better sentences. One way of looking at this is it's a really intelligent thesaurus. But the other way of looking at it is that I think back to, again, the first book we did, the
Art of Fiction.
The Art of Fiction, where he describes the training of a writer. To learn the words, you should read the dictionary. You should read every single book. You should do all these exercises. You should immerse yourself in words, similar probably to the MFA program, where you just get better.
I use the word training loosely because it's, really up to you. They give you all these books to read and you read them. They're not like diagramming sentences for you or anything like that. It's a lot of sitting around in a circle, and having read, a poetry book and discussing what that author is doing and trying to break it apart and see how they're effective, what you like, what you don't, stuff like that.
But you would say that you've gotten better with words and sentences after the MFA program, or having taken the MFA program?
Yes. Yeah, you grow. I would just say you grow as a writer.
Mm-hmm. And as someone that's older coming to the field, I don't want to take 3 years off my life to expand these sets of skills. I kind of want to write now. So I had originally worked on a draft of my novel 2, and then I had to drop it to do editing on novel 1 to get it published, and then I was doing some other stuff, and finally I sat back down and I decided that, what the heck, how about I use some AI and see if it can give me some feedback? And so I kind of developed a technique where I was throwing the stuff I'd already written into the AI and asking it about words and asking about metaphors and asking about sentence flows. And I then handed one of these chapters to my husband. Not the first one I did like this, but like the second one. And he wrote at the bottom, "This is the best piece of writing you've ever written, Kim." Or the best draft. I've read it from your stuff. I mean, it felt great. But at the same time, as we've been doing these workshops, I realized that while I had told Renee that I was doing, and my husband what I was doing, in my critique groups, the person I had not yet told were my editors at the publishing house.
Dun dun.
Actually, it was after one of our workshops that it kind of hit me that I hadn't been telling them what I was doing. And they have a place on their site where they talk about, seeking out new writers and all that. And they have a very strongly worded piece about how they do not use generative writing, AI writing. So I wrote them an email or in a Discord. I revised it several times before I posted it there. But basically I said, here's the thing. I totally agree with your stance on generative writing. I would not want to ever tell an AI, I need to do a fight scene with 2 wizards and a paladin, and they're going to use swords. Lay this out for me. But I have started incorporating AI into my writing, and I gave them examples of what I did. I gave them like the initial and then the variations and what it told me to do. I just kind of summarized it, and then I gave them the raw file of exactly what I had done. And I pushed send.
And it was the longest hour of your life.
They got back to me really fast. Sometimes they don't. Oh, yeah, they got back to me really fast.
Woohoo!
And what they said was, "Thank you so much for telling us this."
Nice.
Several times. "Thank you so much for being honest. Thank you so much for laying this out." And they looked at what I did and said, we're comfortable with what you've done. Don't push it any further. Yep. This is you've moved up to the edge, but this is okay. So big relief.
Yep. And, as a teacher and as a writer, I'm reading this. I have some opinions, but I think this is fine.
What makes you think it's fine?
Because it's an editor. It's editing. It's editing for style.
Mm-hmm.
It's editing for style, and it's something an editor would do in a publishing house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have someone who's going to edit your work, and they're going to change things around and move things and give you suggestions and make you do a lot of work. But a lot of it will be at the sentence level, and a lot of it is to, hone your style and your voice and all of these things. And honestly, that is what AI is doing here. It is doing it without a red pen.
Now, sometimes it does give me phrases, or maybe not whole sentences, but it gives me like a set, like 5 or 6 words strung together that I would not have thought of before. I don't know where that comes from when the AI gives that to me.
What do you mean comes from?
I mean, obviously it read it somewhere. Obviously it used some other piece of work, and that's where it would come up with those.
That is a question about how AI works. And it's not a question I can respond to because I don't really know how it works.
But morally.
Well, why don't we get there?
Okay.
So I read what AI has done. I read her original paragraph, and then she has this all printed out. You use Claude, right?
Yep.
All right. So we're going to go step by step how Kim is using this, I think, as an editor. I don't know what she would call it, which is different from the way I've used it. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, really fascinating. So if you are working on your prose style and you're working on revising your sentences for clarity, this is the workshop for you.
Also, just so you guys know, I use the professional version of Claude. Claude comes in different flavors, and there's one called Opus, which is supposed to be like really amazing, but I've actually discovered that one's a little bit too much. I tend to use Sonnet, which is kind of a step down. Since it's less power intensive, it means I get longer chats as well. Anyway, so I've set myself a couple of rules when I'm doing this. First of all, I need to actually write stuff out before I put it in there. So there has to be some amount of text that goes into the AI that I then ask questions of. I have sometimes like written a piece and said, like I realize I need like timestamps in here, or I need something like that. Could you suggest? And then it would give me a first version of that. And then I also always take the pieces and I rewrite them carefully. And then when the whole chapter is done, I'll reread the whole thing. So I'm constantly picking and changing stuff. I never use just what the AI gives me, which I think is another important aspect.
Well, let's get into the weeds.
Okay.
So read your paragraph, your original paragraph.
And these are all from my new book. This is what I write into Claude. I have the following summary paragraph about gnomes in my fantasy world. And this is first person from one of the boy band members that has arrived in the world and he's learning stuff. So it's a summary paragraph. I made a mental note about that etiquette tip before probing for more information on the gnome situation in Cernic. Sufi answers readily enough. I learned that while gnomes are weaker than humans, they're very effective in teams, and because they require less sleep, food, and living accommodations than the bigums, that's how they refer to other races, even the dwarves, they can make decent money and send some back to their older relatives in the colonies, which were these elaborate warrens dug into small mountains. Relations between the humans and gnomes were congenial when Sufi left, although she does mention, not being citizens, that it was difficult for them to own businesses or hold certain positions, which was a source of tension, especially for the younger generation that grew up in Cernic. Is this clear? Are there changes I can make to improve the flow or understanding? And it's not a bad paragraph.
I really like the phrase gnome situation. I hope that's the title of the chapter.
So it writes back, this paragraph is clear and provides good overview on gnomes in your fantasy world. You've included several interesting cultural details like bigum's terminology and their economic position and social status challenges. AI is always very nice to you.
Claude's a little too nice, in my opinion, but yeah. Not that that's a critique on your work yet. I've been using it and it's a little too nice.
I do have a few suggestions to improve flow and understandability. 1, break it into 2 paragraphs, because that was all one paragraph. The first about your character's interaction with Sufi, and the second about the gnome society details. That would make it easier to digest. 2, clarify Colony's relationship to Cernic earlier in the paragraph to establish context. 3, add a brief physical description of gnomes beyond just being weaker than humans to help readers visualize them. 4, consider mentioning one specific example of a position gnomes can't hold to make their situation more concrete. Overall, it's a solid world-building paragraph that effectively conveys both factual information about gnomes and hints at socio-political tensions that could be relevant to your story. The first-person perspective works well to naturally introduce the information through dialogue. It's not necessarily dialogue, but
Right. So far, it's not really breaking down sentences.
No.
It just says, oh, you're doing these things, and these are the things that you might be. So it takes a general, bird's eye approach to working on this paragraph.
So for the next one, I broke apart the 2 sentences, and I tweaked a few things, but I kept it mostly the same. And then I asked, do you have any words or phrase suggestions? So previously, I just kind of had analyzed it, seemed it was pretty good, and then I asked it specifics. So this is what it says. Here are a few words and phrase suggestions to enhance the clarity and flow. I learned that while gnomes are physically smaller and less strong than humans, This gives the reader a clearer image of gnomes while explaining their weaknesses. 2. They could earn decent wages and send remittances back. More specific economic terminology. 3. Consider changing colonies to ancestral settlements or homeland communities to avoid colonial implications unless that's intentional. 4. Relations between humans and gnomes in Cernic were generally congenial. Adding in Cernic clarifies the location. 5. Especially for the younger generation who were born and raised in Cernic. This emphasizes the generational divide more clearly. Consider adding something about gnomes' appearance or distinct traits beyond their size, perhaps something about their dexterity, longevity. Longevity?
I think it's longevity.
Longevity.
It is a weird word.
Or craftsman skills. So, what I did was, let's make changes 1, 2, 4, and 5.
Okay, that blew my mind. For some reason, when I ask AI to do something, I then take it upon myself to do all that shit myself. I'm like, okay, let's get the work started. And she just does this. And I'm like, oh my God, I could have done that. That would have saved me like 45 minutes. So
sometimes I like to take it out and rework it and then send it back in. And sometimes like, well, that works good, but not the other one. With those changes applied, your paragraph now reads, I learned that while gnomes are physically smaller and less strong than humans, they're very effective in teams. And because they require less sleep, food, and living accommodations than the bigums, that's how they refer to the other races, even dwarves, they could earn decent wages and send remittance back to their older relatives in the colonies, which were these elaborate warrens dug into small mountains. Relations between humans and gnomes in Cernic were generally congenial when Sufi left, although she does mention that, not being citizens, it was difficult for them to own businesses or hold certain positions like the city watch, or in government, which was a source of tension, especially for the younger generation who were born and raised in Cernic. This paragraph flows better now, and suggestions changes help clarify the physical nature of the gnomes, their economic situation, and the generational divide more precisely.
what do you think of the revision so far?
I like it. I like that it's a bit longer. Mm-hmm. I often write very dense and that it stretches it out. And having the AI to kind of go back and forth also gives me a little more breathing room in my head when I'm expanding stuff because I don't feel like I have to get it quite so tight.
Right. Just looking at the previous one, it does read a bit like you are writing science journalism, right? It's very direct. You're using, the words like relations and effective in teams and congenial. And it's just kind of like you're using, not I want to say big words, but you're using these very efficient terminology.
With very precise meanings.
With very precise meanings, which could be a character. That might be the character, and that's how they think. But I know Sufi. This is Sufi, right? Yeah. And she does not think like that so much. So then it goes further, and it's just, okay, break it up. Okay, that makes it easier to read, because when people are reading this, they want it to be faster, or at least they want it to be a casual read. I agree with the colonies statement. That could be a little complicated. The colonial implications. I really like ancestral settlements and homeland communities or just communities, I could see an editor circling that and going, maybe not. Mm-hmm. That's what I would write. Maybe not. Could be a big deal. Maybe choose a different word or, say community. An editor would say that, and you could use that word community and you could put it in. Mm-hmm. And that wouldn't be plagiarism.
Right.
It also felt lighter, felt less serious. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then I was looking through and I said, the final sentence is overstuffed. The one starts with relations between humans and gnomes, da-da-da. Do you have any suggestions? And it says, you're right, that final sentence is quite long and could be split in better flow. Here's my suggestion.
Right. So it's interesting because would it have ever said, no, leave it the way it is? I don't think Claude would ever say that.
No, it would not.
So it's always going to default to your opinion.
Yeah, so I'm always actually making the choices here. I'm always looking and saying, oh, I don't like this here, or this could use a metaphor, or, oh, I want more sensory detail here. I'm going through and saying, this is what I want in this spot. Can you give me a suggestion for how to make that happen?
You are making decisions. Mm-hmm. You're not just letting it take over.
Right. And it's good because often it gives me a description, you'll see in the later ones, where it describes somebody very generically where that's not them at all. So it changed it to relations between humans and gnomes in Cernic were generally congenial when Sufi left, period. However, she emphasizes that not being citizens made it difficult for gnomes to own businesses or hold positions in the city watch, or government, period. This was especially a source of tension in the younger generation who were born and raised in Cernic. I mean, it just went through and it fixed it up. So I didn't have to go back and forth, like, should I make this a sentence, should I make this one, should I do this? Sometimes it just helps to have someone say, break it up here, and then you're good.
What it did, it's interesting. What they did, or what Claude did, was it took out those sentence combining words that would bridge meaning together within a sentence. The problem is that can make it sound convoluted. I mean, the more, you use these modifiers, the more the reader has to pay attention, right? And it's harder to read. So I can see what it did, and I think that's really fascinating, that it uncombined sentences.
And then I actually went to see what I actually finally wrote out, because that's where I stopped in the chat. And I must have gone over it a couple times since then, because the final paragraph actually read.
How did you get to this final paragraph?
I'm not quite sure, because this is the end of what I did in the AI. But then this is a paragraph that I've gone over a couple of times since then. I've given it to critique partners. I always go over the chapters all together.
So you took a break from Claude.
Yeah.
And you started working it on your own.
Yeah. And maybe I left it for a while and came back or whatever. But when I was rewriting, this is what I got. She tells me that while gnomes are physically smaller and weaker than humans, they're very effective in teams. Another Korzu saying is that 3 gnomes can theoretically do the work of 2 humans, but in actuality, it's a 3-to-1 ratio because, unlike humans, all the gnomes show up.
Cute.
And because they require less sleep, food, and living accommodations than the bigums, that's how they refer to all races, even dwarves, their wages, though generally on the lower side, stretch further. Most gnomes send some of their earnings back to their old relatives in the colonies, which are these elaborate warrens dug into small mountains. Relations between humans and gnomes in Cernic are generally congenial. At least that's the case when Sufi left. However, she emphasized not being a citizen has made it difficult for gnomes to own businesses or hold positions in the city watch or government. This is especially a source of tension for the younger generation who were born and raised in Cernic. And basically, I came up with a whole little section there to kind of really show some of the stereotypes about gnomes both ways, to kind of really emphasize that these are migrant workers in this community.
Yes. So what I like about this paragraph, it's funny, but the voice is lighter.
Yes.
It's more conversational. Although there are certain things, if it were up to me, I would circle. And I have a feeling AI is going to do the same thing. It's funny, but in actuality, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. That I think is funny, and all the gnomes will show up. So these sentences, these words are, they're not like huge words or anything. They're taking on some humor. They're lighter. I think it's funny, though, because later in the paragraph, it starts to get stuffier again, almost academic. Relations, the word relations, generally congenial. However, she emphasizes. It's like interesting because it's reaching towards a more human voice or a more, natural voice in the beginning, but you're still holding on to these words. You're still like, the sinus journalist is strong in you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's interesting that AI seems to have made you lighter in the voice, but you're still holding on.
Yes, yes. So now the next one. This is done in the third person, and it is a shorter bit of text. So there's a few things that are a bit confusing here, but basically, I'm just looking at making the paragraphs flow a bit better. Sufi brushes off his condensation. Damien is right about Bidlow, and she should have remembered about the ravenous Avery. It doesn't explain why Damien would have sent her a bird unless her grandfather informed him that Sufi was returning to Cernic. But Montague savors being inscrutable. She has a hard time imagining him bothering to repeat what he learns from Sufi's messenger bird. A thought even more horrifying than her grandfather interrogating her avatar comes to Sufi's mind. Other people watching him interrogate her avatar. So It's several different ideas that are one on top of the other. And I wrote, it covers a line of thought, keeping the content and not expanding the text too much. Do you have word or phrase suggestions?
Interesting. Word or phrase. So this is a drafty daft. This is more like, this is what I want. I'm not sure how to tell it in a story mode.
Right.
In prose writing for your book.
Right. And actually, it makes it easier for me to write stuff because I can write it in a way that is correct for content, but not necessarily sounding the best. Mm-hmm. So it helps me get those ideas down on paper in the order I want to and all that stuff, but not necessarily the flow.
And even in your idea writing, it is very science journalist. The word interrogate. Inscrutable. The word inscrutable. I don't think Sufi would use the word inscrutable.
I mean, she's smart.
Most people, even smart people, don't use words like that in their everyday speech. Mm-hmm. You don't think in the word inscrutable.
Yeah, but when you're writing stuff and you just use basic words again and again, it gets so frustrating.
It's the pattern. I guess that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's okay. Mm-hmm. I think it is okay to reuse the same words over and over again and go back and change those words instead of trying to use different words all the time, because that could get old.
That is actually true. So what it did was it said, I'll help refine this paragraph while maintaining its length and content. Let me analyze it line by line with suggestions.
This is cool because it's teaching you with your own examples how to do this. I think that's brilliant.
And it gives 3 bullet points there, or 3 points.
Yeah. Well, it says Sufi brushes off his condescension. This is direct and works well. I don't agree with AI right now. The word condescension is driving me a little nuts right now. If I was the editor, I would have already circled that shit, but that's just me.
So then it notices I spelled Damien 2 different ways. So that's good because I often misspell stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it says, for the thought progression, we can make the content more fluid. Here's a suggested revision. And basically what it does is it kind of it tightens it up. It changes a couple of words and such.
It combines sentences.
It does.
It actually starts adding words that would combine ideas. There's also a semicolon in it, and I don't know if I agree with that either, but we'll see.
It loves its M dashes. There are so many M dashes that Claude puts in stuff.
I do.
All over the place.
I do love me the M dash and the colon. I'm a big fan of the colon.
I love M dashes, but if it had its way, there would be an M dash in every single paragraph.
Are you sure it's not because you're using what they call noun phrase appositives and they're long ones?
It might be. It might be that my writing definitely falls in, but it always suggests that. It never suggests any other option.
That's interesting because, yeah, you have to create space on the page for the eye to keep track of where it's going when you have, you're combining things. And if you've got a noun phrase appositive and it's a long description of a person or something, that visual space for the eye is helpful for keeping track. That's my theory. I haven't studied it.
Okay, so at this point, I was reading through it, and I said, the text feels a little plain. Can you make it more interesting? I often get these requests. That feels kind of flat. That's kind of basic. Could you make this more engaging? When I'm working on it with summaries for our podcast, I say, how do you make it so people would want to listen to this podcast?
But how would Claude know? I think it's interesting that you asked Claude to make it more interesting. What does Claude think is interesting? When it hears that word, what are all the associative phrases and commands it's getting when you ask it that? That's what I think would be fascinating.
Oh, I think it takes more vivid verbs, probably. It makes more descriptive things, that sort of thing. Anyway, so what I get is Sufi swats away his condensation. Damien is right about Bidlow. She should have known better about the ravenous aviary. Yet it doesn't explain why he would have sent her a bird unless her grandfather had mentioned her imminent return to Cernic. But Montague hoards secrets like a magpie hoards trinkets. She can hardly imagine him deigning to share news from her messenger bird. Then a thought more chilling than her grandfather interrogating her avatar slithers into her mind. Others lurking unseen, watching the interrogation unfold.
Dun-dun-dun.
So that makes it more interesting.
It does. It does. I find it interesting that when you gave it your ideas in the very beginning, it is keeping them in those sentences. It is not expanding, really. And it's also doing it all in order.
And I'm pretty careful with that. Sometimes I'll just say, can you make this more interesting? And it comes up with 4 paragraphs. Like, no, we want to keep it the same length. Let's make it more interesting. Earlier in the chat, I said to keep it the same length. So that's probably why it's still doing that.
So swats away instead of dismisses, right? Gives more personality than dismisses. And I think that's good because it's actually something I can see in my head. See like a hand swatting it away. Added the magpie simile to characterize Montague's secretive nature. It's funny because they're talking about an aviary, so maybe that's where Claude came up with the bird. I like that too, the magpie, because that's, part of their world.
It feels more fantasy-like.
Yeah. Deigning, that's a weird word. Deigning to share emphasizes his superiority complex, slithers into her mind, adds menace. I like that. Lurking unseen creates more tension and unease than just witnessing. I totally agree. I don't like dining to share. That again, those words are huge and it's hard to see them. Unless this person is supposed to be like, royalty, and they're like, this is how they speak, and they speak in a British accent, like that kind of stuff. I can't see Sophie like that.
And then I said to it, let's use like a dragon hoards gold. For the final fear, Sophie is worried that her grandfather publicly interrogating her avatar. So I'll just go to the final ones here. But Montague hoards secrets like a dragon hoards gold. She can hardly imagine him deigning to share news from a messenger bird. Then a thought more chilling than her grandfather interrogating her avatar slithers into her mind. He might have done it publicly for all to see. The final line now directs Sophie's fear of public humiliation and exposure. I kept slithers into her mind since it adds the creeping horror of realizing her private conversation might have been a public spectacle. Would you like me to try other variations on the final line to better emphasize the public nature of the interrogation? And I wrote, nope, that's great, thanks. You are welcome. The progression flows naturally now. The dragon's simile fits perfectly with the fantasy setting while highlighting Montague's character. The final revelation lands with the right punch of mortification.
Claude, you're too kind.
So I've actually kind of stopped. I used to finish up the conversations with it and, it's like, nope, thank you for that or whatever sort of thing. But I've kind of actually dropped that now. When I get enough, I jump to the next topic.
Yeah. If you need an ego, like your ego stroked. Whenever you say thank you, Claude always says another compliment.
Yes.
Yeah. So is this the final version?
I think that was the final version.
Okay. So the things you took in your writing was the suggestions it gave you about changing the verbs. Swats away. Did you keep deigning to share?
I think I kept deigning.
Yeah. Lurking unseen. All right. So here's the thing. Is that plagiarism?
Yeah, that's the question.
That's the question. And I think we should talk about that. You used it and it's in your final draft now, right?
It is in my final draft.
Okay. So do you think it's plagiarism? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I know it came from somewhere, but a lot of stuff we write comes from somewhere. And I think it's something I've decided that it's okay for me. What do you think?
So if this was an academic...
If this was your own writing.
Oh, if this was my own writing, I would change everything.
You would change everything.
Partly because the academic in me wouldn't allow myself to use those words.
Okay. So, but like if you wanted to pick something other than SWAT, what else would you use? Would you go back to the original or would you like brushes away? I mean, then you're at a certain point where like, you're just choosing verbs to fit where it's put stuff.
So this is hard because I wouldn't write like that. If I were writing it, I wouldn't say Sophie swats away his condescension. Sophie ignores his bullshit. That's what I would write. I would seriously write that. Sophie ignores his bullshit. Yeah, Damien might be right about Bidlow. She could have known better than to go to the Revius aviary. It doesn't explain why we have sent her a bird. Then again, why send her the bird? Her grandfather did mention that she was going to return to Cernic, but Montague hoards secrets like dragons hoards go. She can hardly imagine him foaming at the mouth to share news from her messenger bird. And foaming at the mouth is a cliche. I do understand that. That could be Claude trying to avoid it. But if it's to keep a voice, I think some cliches are okay. So see how I'm rewriting it?
Yeah.
And if I was editing this as an editor, I would circle the word condescension. And I'd be like something else. her imminent return. That sounds, again, like this weird distance with these words. You're creating a distance between the reader and the character. And I would either get rid of it or find something easier, something she would say in conversation maybe. I think it's just a matter of preference. If I read this and I had listened to this podcast and heard you break it down, and I was a listener and I was reading your book, I would be totally fine with this.
Okay.
I would be fine with this. I'd be like, so what? What's the difference between swats away and the other word?
Brushes away.
Brushes away. Doesn't really matter to me. Yeah.
I think part of it's also that when you're writing, this novel's probably going to be, it's definitely be over 130,000 words. It'll probably be close to maybe up to 150,000 words. When you start to get that large of a story to read, I think that if you're not writing in a literary genre, if you're writing genre fiction, people like to kind of just sort of bounce along and read the ideas. I mean, that's the other part of it. It's like if I was going to write a short story and submit it somewhere, it would not have any AI in it.
Oh, right. They have different standards.
Other than like using it to like I might give it a verb and say, give me some other options. But this is something that's already been purchased. I mean, already been put on a contract, and I've talked to my editor. And this is kind of for the audience that I'm sending it to that's going to be reading this. I think that they will be fine with this.
A thought just occurred to me too.
What's that?
I don't think there's much of a difference between using swats away because AI told you to and just using the synonym button on your computer.
Right.
Like that word would have popped up because I don't use the synonym button a lot, but sometimes I do. I'm like, that word doesn't quite work, and I'll do the double click and it comes up and that word would have been there and you would have taken it and it would not have been plagiarism.
And when you feed it actually like some of the words around it, it does a better job of matching the right verb. Because that's the other problem. Sometimes when you're reading something, you read that list of synonyms and it's like, well, that's the one you need, this one right here. The other ones mean kind of the similar, but you zero on exactly what the one you need is. And AI is using that same context. Like I often notice that the ones that I want for word choices are usually near the top. Mm-hmm. And then as it goes on, there's like they're less useful just because there are certain words that we recognize work really well in a sentence, in a particular sentence with the words around it.
Yeah. I feel like if this was, I don't know. I don't know what to say. All I'm saying is for some reason, I am okay with it. And not just because you're my friend. I feel it has something to do with the genre. And I don't know if that's like saying something about me. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy. I read it. I put a lot of books down though. And if I had known this, which I do know, I'm still going to read it and I'm still going to have a good time because that's why I'm picking up this book.
Right.
It does add clarity. It helps you tell the story. I also like the fact that it's teaching you how to fix things. Yeah. It's telling you why it changed the things it changed. And I think that's kind of cool.
I'm going to go through the last one, which is kind of a sentence one. Then I think about an orchestra before the conductor comes on stage and the single changing notes rising up and reverberating through the hall. Do you have any suggestions to make this image / feel more engaging for the reader? Because it's a good sentence. Yeah, it's got, interesting verbs. It's got like phrasing and all that, but it just didn't pop in my mind. And one thing, when I listen to book bloggers, when I see people do reviews, like people like language that pops. They like, especially for fantasy, they like beautiful language.
And descriptions of food, George R. Martin.
Yes. So it says, I think your sentence already has a lovely image, but there's some suggestions to make it even more engaging. And it tells me that I could add sensory details about the sounds twined together, chaotic harmony. They make movements of sounds more dynamic, soar, colliding, incorporating the emotional content of the moment, the promise, anticipation. And so what it gives me is, I think about an orchestra tuning before the conductor appears, those scattered solitary notes rising and colliding, filling the hall with anticipation's chaotic harmony. I wrote this as, I think about an orchestra tuning before the conductor appears. I feel in my ears and bones those scattered solitary notes rising and colliding, filling the hall with chaotic discord. So I took it kind of as a jumping point where I had something that was descriptive but not very sensory. Initially, it was single changing notes, and it said switches to scattered solitary notes, and rising up and reverberating to rising and colliding. Mm-hmm. And it just has a more poetry flow to it. It just feels more fantasy.
Yeah. So this one is interesting. So like that's how I revise to try and hit that sweet spot there. Right. My brain tries to go there to that second version. For example, the solitary notes rising and colliding. I like that a lot because it's very visual and almost violent. And it's inside the hall. So it's trapped in this hall and it's flying around, right? So I'm always trying to create a good image. And that's a really good image it showed. But I don't know if how much work went into that. Like I
probably would have rewritten this several times. I probably would have gotten something that was more poetic in the end, but I don't think I would have gotten rising and colliding.
No. And I think it sounds really beautiful. Is it yours? I don't know. But does it matter? So that's the thing. Does it matter?
Yeah.
And I don't think it matters.
So for the final bit, I'd said, any way to have both sentences not start with the word I.
Why?
Because it says, I rewrote and I feel my ears.
So?
And I prefer to have variations in the starts of my sentences.
Sure. Okay. Well, just letting you know, just because two sentences start with I, your reader won't even notice because it's focused on that person. So, maybe don't overuse it, but like I would be wary about trying to avoid starting sentences the same way all the time. Unless you're doing it excessively, it could actually sound weird because it almost like the reader will know something's off.
So it gave me, the orchestra tunes before the conductor appears, and through my ears and bones I feel those scattered solitary notes rising and colliding, filling the hall with chaotic discord. So put it all in one sentence. Or it gave me, thinking about orchestra tuning before the conductor appears, my ears and bones resonate with those scattered solitary notes. It gave me different options, which actually I didn't terribly care for at all because I looked back in the text and this is what I found my final version to be.
But wait a minute, I just want to react too. I don't like those versions either. They're like adding things that don't need to be. My ears and bones resonate. It's like, okay, you're taking it too far. There is poetic and then there's just annoyingly poetic. And that's where it's going.
So in the end, I did manage to make it so it didn't both start with I. Her words put me in mind of an orchestra tuning before the conductor appears. I feel my ears and bones, those scattered solitary notes rising and colliding, filling the hall with chaotic discord.
Okay. It's all right. It's all right. I think there might be too much. See, now the editor in me is like, the ears and the bones. And that's just going too far. Filling the hall with chaotic discord. That's going too far too, I think.
I like chaotic discord.
All right.
But you're right. I mean, maybe I feel my bones, those scattered solitary notes.
Sure. Or you could just say her words put me in mind. Put me in mind of an orchestra? What does that mean, to put me in mind?
Makes me think.
Then say that. I don't know. I mean, what was wrong with the one that they gave you?
And that's another aspect too, is that once you start fiddling with this stuff, this is the problem with wordsmithing. You keep going back and forth and back and forth, and this word and this word and this word. A lot of writers that are much faster than me don't really, like I can tell the amount of work that goes in the first 2 chapters of a book. Like they just wow these words, and then I'll go like to chapter 8 or so. I'm like, well, okay, this person just started writing stuff. I mean, like the care on later chapters, and it's not a bad thing. But like when I'm reading, I do notice if a bunch of sentences start with the word I or repetition. And maybe it's just because my mind kind of focuses in. Like I can't necessarily do it, but I can see it. Right. That's the problem. I'm writing this stuff. I'll say, I need sensory information here. But like, what am I going to use exactly? I'm not sure. Or I need a metaphor. I used sensory in the previous paragraph, so this one needs some metaphor. Like I'm definitely reading through and saying, this paragraph needs this needs to have this, this needs to have more tension here. So I'm very aware of what the words are doing, but I can't figure out how to make them do it.
Right.
Off the top of my head.
Right. Well, that's, you're a big reader, but usually that's where the reading comes in. You've read thousands and thousands of pages of prose. You study it or you don't, right? And usually those words come to you over time because you've been exposed to them. Claude has been exposed with a photographic memory to all this literature. And so in a way, you're kind of doing the same thing. Like back in the day, you just had to read before AI. You had to read and read and read, and hopefully it's soaked up into your brain. You might diagram a few sentences to figure out why a writer was so good. Or there's books on that too. Like some people will take, whole passages out of famous books and be like, okay, let's break down the prose and see why this author we think is so good. What's the difference between that and reading that book and getting ideas from that and then asking AI to be your editor? Because an editor might actually do that. Be like, why wouldn't an editor just be like, okay, no, you need to add more description, get closer and closer and dig deeper into this metaphor, you know?
The reason an editor wouldn't do that is because there are 150,000 words for them to read. And at a certain point, they let a certain amount of stuff go because the human brain can't go through. I mean, they've got stuff to do. And so there's a lot of it, well, this is good enough, this is good enough. When I'm critiquing someone's stuff, I try to find the most important things I can critique. I do try to limit the comments because you don't want to override. Like I'm doing this paragraph by paragraph, but if I had the whole document and I got this kind of feedback, I'd go insane.
Oh.
Like you can't ask an editor, oh, I've got these 2 paragraphs. Could you take a look at it and tell me what you think? In the end, they're going to read those 2 paragraphs as, the 2 paragraphs in chapter 18, halfway through the chapter. And they're not going to have that same ooh, let's tweak every single word.
Okay.
I mean, for someone doing poetry or something short story, they might, but for an over 100,000 word book.
Well, here's another thing. A lot of writers will give shout outs to their editors. Mm-hmm. It is a collaborative process. The thing with Claude, is it just like the same editor for everybody? Or is it like tuning itself to your own work? I mean, we noticed that with the last episode, ChatGPT was like tuning itself to the style that you'd written in. Mm-hmm. And it was talking to me in, weird tones with emojis and shit. And maybe this editor is now like tweaking itself specifically to your needs, which would make it your editor. I don't know. It's kind of making me wonder, is it one editor to rule them all? And then everyone's relying on it, which isn't good. I don't think that's a good idea because everyone needs to do their own thing, or they need their influences in different places. I don't want to be tuned by the same fork as everyone else, right? But then there's these standards, right? There's these very basic, good writing standards that people follow. And they're all mostly the same. Yeah. And that is a fork that everyone's being tuned by. Use descriptive language, use active verbs, all that stuff. Use sentence variations.
Or even the connecting words between clauses, even how do you do a number of sentences that are short. Like humanity's been writing long enough that we have figured out ways that work to write.
Yes. Unfortunately, all the books we've read, none of them really nail it down extremely well. But that's just my issue.
Part of what makes this work is because you couldn't ask another human to spend this amount of time going back and forth with you on your text.
I mean, you do in a class.
Right, but you're still giving them the entire essay to look at. Like you're not giving them every paragraph by paragraph. Let's work this back and forth. Okay, now that we've changed this paragraph, how does this change the next one?
Right.
That's a crazy amount of work.
Well, it depends on what you've hired them to do.
Right.
When I had students and I had big piles of papers, I wouldn't give as many. I did the thing I was taught to do. 2 local, 2 global. Mm-hmm. 2 sentence-like things that are the big ones, like, oh boy, I see that error over and over again. Going to mention it in one of those sentences. Don't mention it in every single sentence because, you only got 10 minutes to grade this paper because you've got 300 of them waiting for you. But if I'm going through with a fine-tooth comb during a office hour, we would take it sentence by sentence by sentence. Mm-hmm. We might only get 2 paragraphs into the whole session, the office hour, but it's a very close reading. Mm-hmm. You're doing a very close reading, a very close edit, and that could be very helpful. But yes, I would imagine for more than an hour or more than 45 minutes, that would drive someone insane.
Right. I wonder if we're driving Claude insane.
I just want to know what to cut. That's my big thing. But I think this is great. It is like tuning you. What have you learned so far? Have you found any patterns? We can actually ask Claude, what are the kinds of patterns you see in my prose style?
Right. Although the problem is that basically these are all different sessions. So every time I start a new session, I basically start a new instance of Claude.
Why?
Because for the way these work, so you have a session, it'll go back to the text and it'll know what you've said in the past in that session. But at a certain point, it's too much energy to keep going back and rereading. you only get so much computing time. And when you hit a certain limit, they pop you out. And they'll tell you that if you want to get more prompts, don't go too long in a session. Like, they'll say, you're getting kind of long here. It's like, okay, I've done 3 paragraphs. I'm going to jump to the next paragraph in a new piece. And then it's a brand new Claude looking at everything.
Interesting. Okay. So you can reset Claude.
Yeah. Every time you open a new prompt window, you're resetting Claude.
See, I use the same thread for everything so far.
Doesn't kick you out yet?
No. But I guess I'm not asking it a lot. Like, I don't ask it a ton of stuff. I feel like it is teaching me in a way. And I'm seeing patterns where I'm not like using the timestamps I'm supposed to use. And sometimes I'm not giving enough exposition in the beginning. Do you see any patterns?
Well, like I've gotten better at like identifying if I want a paragraph to be more sensory or if there should be a metaphor. So there's that. I don't think it's actually like content-wise, it's not changing the way I write. Although the other thing it's doing is I will let my writing breathe a lot more. Mm-hmm. And that's the back and forth. But I think the text I feed into it is very much my basic style. I don't think my basic style has been changing that much.
Interesting.
I'll say the other thing that I never let it touch is my dialogue.
Oh.
It never touches my dialogue.
That's it. Why?
Because I know exactly what all my characters to say and back and forth, and I know what they sound like. I mean, I haven't even tried it. I guess the thing is I'm so satisfied with my dialogue or that I can rewrite it to fit that's what I want. Now, the descriptions that go with the dialogue, that's where I need a bit more work. Mm-hmm. But the dialogue itself stays.
I mean, what's the difference? What was the other word for swat away? Dismiss?
Yeah.
Well, what's the difference between dismiss and swats away? Why do you think it made that suggestion?
Well, swats is more exciting. I mean, it's visual. It's like...
So next time you write a sentence, are you going to think, I should make that more visual? That verb more visual?
I might, but I wouldn't think about what the word I was going to use.
But the prompt will come to you, right? Your brain will go, I know AI is going to ask me to do this.
I might go to Sufi brushes away her condensation, but I don't know if I pick up swats.
That's okay.
I like swats better.
Okay. But it is teaching you a little bit, right? No?
I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but I don't want to claim, by doing this, I'm getting to be a better writer, and soon I won't need AI at all, because I haven't seen that. I got to be honest. I have not seen a jump. Like I said, actually, it helps me write faster because I know I don't have to fixate on the right word for this thing because AI will help me figure it out later.
See, I'm hoping that as AI helps guide me with workshop and like telling me the things that I'm missing, that I will learn and eventually I will not use it anymore, or I would use it for very different things. It's like, okay, I nailed that. I'm good. I have yet to ask Claude to make my prose change at all. Actually, I haven't had it revise a sentence. I haven't had it do anything like that. So that's interesting.
You've been working on the memoir for a long time. You've hired editors.
I have, yes.
You've done workshops on it. We've talked about stuff. We've gone by chapter. We've done all that stuff. Do you feel that all that has helped you better when you come to a new chapter to figure out how to make it flow and how to have it?
Oh, yeah. I've learned. I mean, whenever I go to a workshop, I'm always trying to learn. I don't know if you've seen the notes that I take in books, and I'm sure you have.
So you think that the place you are when you started doing workshops and writing this book, you're now not making those mistakes that were pointed out in the initial workshops?
A lot of them. I know for a fact I've become a better writer through workshops, from editors saying things. At least that's my goal when I'm looking at stuff. I'm like, I see what I'm doing there. My goal is to always apply it to my future writing. You don't do that?
My first book, one of the big comments made was that I wasn't showing how my main character thought about other people, what his reaction was, how he was filtering that. And it has helped a lot. I'm much more aware when I'm writing that I need to include I need to have more stuff on the page. And that is something that I have gotten better at least seeing where it needs to go. Sometimes I figure out how to do it, sometimes I don't. But that definitely is something I learned because I went through the same prose 5 times.
That's the process.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. With AI, it's doing the same thing for you.
Yeah.
But you're doing it on a sentence level. I can't see you not soaking that up.
I suppose.
A little bit. You have to.
A bit, yeah.
I mean, if you look at the patterns, right?
Yeah. Although I still think that practice makes permanent. And that means that I start to get used to a workflow where I'm putting on a certain amount of words, I'm getting feedback from the AI, I'm incorporating it in, and that's a back and forth process. And maybe in a year's time or something, I can say that, I removed AI from the process, but I'm almost kind of thinking that it might become more ingrained in how to use AI and use it more efficiently. So we'll see.
I like to think that because we have taste, right? We've been reading a lot of books. We've been working on this creative writing thing for a while. We know what questions to ask it.
That's true too.
And I would imagine someone who doesn't have that background, a younger person who hasn't had as many hours reading, and experiences, that they're not going to know the prompts to ask, right? They won't have a more discerning eye.
Or when the AI gives you like 8 different suggestions, how to naturally hear which one sounds right.
Yeah, for you, right?
Because there's nothing more dangerous than a kid that never reads with a thesaurus that wants to make their piece sound good.
God. Yes, I agree. So here's the thing. Will Claude make your writing better, or will it make you a better writer? And you say that it makes your writing sound better, but it will not make you a better writer.
Not in the traditional sense of the workshop sense that you're talking about.
Okay.
Yep. So I like to take kind of pulse at the end of each of these workshops. And so how are you feeling about AI now, Renee?
Well, it'll take a while because the books that are going to come out in the next 5 years, I might scrutinize a little bit more. I might go, how much of this may have been AI written? Will that bother me? I don't know. I'm wondering if there will be disclaimers at the beginning of books now. In what ways did AI be part of the editing process? I have a feeling there's going to be some scandals coming out.
I think a lot of people aren't going to say they're using this.
No.
I think a lot. Part of the reason is because there are people that are so vehement that any amount of AI basically makes you not a writer anymore.
They're welcome to say that, but they used to say all sorts of things. I mean, they say all sorts of horrible things about creativity and writers.
But having people that are very loud in the community saying that is going to... I knew my editors. I'd worked with my editors. It still took a lot of courage to write that out, to tell them, because it's scary. And you really worry that, they're going to say no. I was really worried they're going to say, this is too much. You need to go back to the other way. And I was going to okay, I guess I'll go back to the other way. But it worked out. But honesty.
Yeah. So here's the thing. The thing that bugs me about AI is it's taking over. The technology seems to focus on getting rid of artists and writers, people who made money and made a living that way. And any of creative art, how can we try to not pay an author? How can we try to not pay the writer or the artist? That kind of shit pisses me off. And so one big thing I don't like about AI is that it's not behind a really big paywall, which I think might, because it would prevent, students from using it and not learning. But also because it stole all of our work on the internet. It stole George Saunders' work and did not pay these people.
Right.
They should be paid. They just stole it. And it's like, that's a typical thing to do to artists and writers, is to just steal. And that's what they did. So I kind of feel like if they had paid George Saunders and those other authors a fair wage and asked their permission to use their stuff, I would feel more comfortable using AI, because you at least know where.
What would be a fair wage?
Well, it would probably be a portion of whatever this makes. And it would be up to that author. But I think that if they're going to continue to be used.
Okay, but like we're talking about, they're taking 10,000 books.
Okay.
I'm paying $20 a month.
Okay.
I mean, are you saying that basically anybody whose book goes into it is equally valid? Some people are much better writers. What about a giant Harlequin series where basically one wrote 30 books and George Saunders wrote 3? Does that mean that she gets three times as much?
It depends on the contract. See how complicated it is? It also means that the fact that we're paying so little for this technology, the only way they could do that is they stole it.
Right.
And I don't think that's fair. The people are so used to getting things, trading their information, all this other stuff. They don't understand what it means to not pay. And how much thievery there is. I actually think that AI should be 10 years behind, because it has to figure out a way to pay these people fairly. That's just what I think. I think it should have taken another 10 years for them to figure out how to pay these people and then create something that may not be available to every single person, but at least people would have received a fair wage and for
Well, that sounds like a great question when we get our AI expert in the next week or so.
Yeah, my buddy Bill.
All right. So I think we'll call that good for this workshop.
Yep.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts about this. If you are finding this podcast interesting, please pass it on to your friends. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this, and I kind of wanted to put us out on the potential chopping block, was because I think we should have these discussions and people should know what's happening, because otherwise you just get these weird dichotomies where someone's like, I can write a novel with 18 prompts and get it on Amazon in a week. And on the other side, like no AI whatsoever. And there's space in between. And if we're not talking about that space in between, I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I think this is a really good conversation. I encourage you to share it with your friends, your writer friends, your reader friends, see what they have to say. See what they think. Maybe drop us a line, send us an email. Let us know what you're thinking of our series. We're nearing its end.
I don't know. I still got some ideas.
More ideas about AI?
I got some ideas. Yeah, we'll see.
Oh, all right. Well, this series might go on a bit more than I thought, but I've already started dropping books off on Kim's table. Like, hey, we got to think about the next book we're going to read. So this is not going to just be a podcast about AI.
No. We'll be switching out, but there's a few more things I want to do.
Cool. All right. Anyway, happy writing, everyone.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga Adam. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
Dining. What is that even? Imagine him dining to share news from her mess.
Dating.